It's been another week of tournaments and the second week now of the post-Hiram meta, so the metagame is starting to settle just a little bit. Let's check out what's happened this week. Up first, as always, we're going to be looking at the distribution of archetypes across the metagame in the last 7 days. Once more, this data is from Inkdex, who make this possible, so thank you so much to Inkdex for making all of these resources available on your website. And it is looking a bit different from last week. We still see a little bit more of a mix in the metagame. We don't have the 60% Ruby, Sapphire, or Sapphire Steel decks. We're seeing a lot more of a distribution. And it is actually Ruby Amethyst taking the top spot for the most represented deck this week with a whopping 20% of the metagame. After that, we have Ruby Sapphire coming in at 2nd place, Steel Song coming in at 3rd place, not far behind, and Amethyst Steel just a little bit behind that. But the big thing to call out here is actually Amethyst Sapphire. Blurple is taking the 5th spot there, which it wasn't even showing in the main decks last week. But I know a lot of people who were playing Ruby Sapphire have kind of switched over to Blurple instead. So that could be why that we're seeing it kind of taking a bit more of a meta representation. After that, we have the usual suspects. So we've got Discard. We've got Discard in Emerald Steel, but we also have Discard in Amethyst Emerald. But we also see in Amethyst Emerald the bounce archetype as well, following closely behind. After that, we have Ruby Steel starting to kind of show a little bit more presence in the metagame. Sadly, not really putting up the results, but it is interesting. People are starting to play that more. And then after that, we have the Amber Amethyst, more mid-range version of the deck, and also the other decks there. So it is really great to see a much more healthy metagame. And as I said at the top of the video, we are starting to see some convergence around kind of a few of those decks now. The tournaments we're going to be looking at this week are 3 from North America and 1 from France. There weren't a huge number of tournaments over the last week, likely because of the Easter long weekend, but we do have 4 that we're going to be looking at, 3 in North America and 1 in Europe. We're going to be looking at the Bibbidi Bobbidi Brawl. That was a 53-player event in North America. We're going to look at the Shadow Series 1K, which was a 36-player event, and we're also going to be looking at face-to-face games at 1K, a 27-player event that actually happened right here in Montreal. And then the other tournament we're looking at is one in France, which was the Road to Lorcana 6 Season 7, which was a 30-player event. Taking a deeper dive now at the top 8 for those events, so the Bibbidi Bobbidi Brawl looks like this: 3 Amethyst Sapphire, 2 Amber Steel, 1 Ruby Sapphire, 1 Amethyst Steel, and 1 Emerald Sapphire. Steel Song did take the 1st place, but again, it's really nice to see this much more diverse metagame, this much more diverse top 8. I'm particularly cool seeing Emerald Sapphire being able to crack the top 8 in a big event like this. At the Shadow Series 1K, a little bit less diverse. We actually see 4 Amber Steel decks. It was a mixture of Steel Song and the more aggro diggy hole style deck, so it wasn't all the same deck, which is at least good for the diversity. And then after that, very diverse with 1 Amethyst Sapphire, 1 Sapphire Steel, 1 Amethyst Steel, and 1 Emerald Steel making it into the top 8. But it was Amethyst Steel that took it down, with Steel Song and Amber Steel aggro in 2nd and 3rd place. Next, we're looking at the Road to Lorcana 6, and this is absolutely the most diverse top 8 we've seen since we've been covering the metagame over this last month. So we see 2 Amethyst Ruby, we see 1 Amethyst Emerald, which was actually the deck that took it home. We see Sapphire Ruby, which was the 2nd place deck. We see a Blurple, which was the 3rd place deck. And then after that, we have Amethyst Steel, Emerald Steel, and Amber Amethyst. So incredible to see this diversity here. And then finally, the top 8 breakdown for face-to-face games. The event was taken by Amethyst Sapphire. We do see 2 Amethyst Sapphire decks. 2nd place was Amethyst Steel, 2 Amethyst Steel decks. And then after that, we see Steel Song, which took 3rd place. We have Amethyst Ruby, Amber Emerald, and Ruby Sapphire. So again, another nice, healthy, diverse top 8. You love to see it. Now over to the deck list themselves, and we're going to mix it up a little bit this week, and we're going to start with Amethyst Sapphire. So Blurple definitely showing up into the metagame this week with force, and it was able to take 1st place at the face-to-face 1K event. This is a deck list from Etienne Germain, and I'm not the biggest Amethyst Sapphire player, but this is looking quite standard to what we would expect from these types of lists. Really, a game plan for a list like this is really to accelerate your rings. So you've got the T-pose, the Sildy Azurite Sea to hopefully almost always have that turn 2 ramp in order to kind of skip ahead into turn 4 and get to your later game a lot quicker than a lot of other decks can get to their late game. We have control elements in there. We have Elsa, who's able to exert, and then we'll let you challenge down with all of those Amethyst cards. Of course, you're going to be able to make a lot of favorable trades. You've got things in here like Merlin Crab, kind of a staple of this deck, really. He's there to buff up something like a Diablo, which you can then trade into another character and draw a card. But really, I think one of the most interesting additions to this list is Anna Icebreaker, a 2/3 questing for 2 with support, but she also has the ability, when you play this character, chosen character can't ready at the start of their next turn. So again, it's just there to really help you control the board, keep your opponent's characters locked down, allowing you to kind of crawl ahead and get to victory. One of the biggest struggles that Amethyst Sapphire had traditionally was if your opponent goes wide, it's quite difficult for you to be able to respond to that. You don't have any board wipes or anything like that. It's very much done through challenging, but again, I said it last week, the Belle Apprentice Inventor, being able to get her onto the board as this 3/3 who can often trade quite favorably with a lot of characters, it really does help out this deck. So even if you open with something like a turn 1 Popsicle, you can start ramping, and then when you do draw into your Belle, you can play her. So it is interesting that actually the deck that's benefiting the most right now from the Popsicle Belle combo is definitely Blurple here. So very curious to see how the deck evolves as we go. Next up, I want to look at this list, also from the face-to-face event, top 8 from Anthony Semino. Very much the same kind of call with a few other things mixed in. So we do see Iago. Iago is a card that was starting to crop up in the metagame last week, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of him today as well. He is a very, very well started 4/6 evasive character, so super strong, especially if your opponent doesn't have any actions to take him out. After that, we do see 2 copies of Tamatoa happy as a clam in this list. Because you're going to be sacking your items with Belle, it's a good way to bring them back, and we've seen the Popsicle kind of taking on its secondary function of healing characters a lot more, so being able to recur those items with Tamatoa can be very powerful. We also see 2 copies of Cusco in this list as well. Of course, if you're expecting a lot of locations or items, Cusco is definitely a good pick for this list. And 4 copies of Finders Keepers, definitely a good inclusion in this list if you're expecting discard. Oftentimes you have so much ink left over, this is a great way to use up that ink and draw cards. So interesting list. And then we're going to go over to this list from Chris Louis, who took top 2 at the Bibbidi Bobbidi Brawl, and actually looking quite a bit different here. We have the same core, we see 4 copies of Iago rather than 2, but it's more the top end of this deck that looks different. We have 2 copies of Gaston, Intellectual Powerhouse. We know he's a fantastic quester, but his ability to be able to look at those top 3 cards of your deck and put 1 into your hand, very powerful to help you find the answers you need in the game. We've got 1 copy of Mufasa, Ruler of Pride Rock, a card a lot of people were excited about, and potentially this is the right shell for him in an Amethyst Sapphire deck list, and very, very difficult character to get off the board on your opponent's side, especially in a heavy steel meta. And if you are able to quest with Mufasa even once, you're really going to make it very difficult for your opponent to come back. So I love seeing that. And then after that, 4 copies of McDuck Manor, one of the strongest locations in the deck. The 9 willpower is very, very difficult for a lot of decks to remove, so it's definitely a good alternate win condition here, and the perfect follow-up to a Be Prepared on your opponent's side of the board. Starting us off in Amethyst Steel, we have this first place list from the Shadow Series 1K from Lucas McHill Zemke, and I think you could be forgiven for thinking this looks like a very standard Amethyst Steel list, but there is one certain card not included in this list, which is the Giant Cobra. One of the strongest cards this set, I think a lot of people would agree. This is the color combination you can actually use it in, and this player not choosing to. Instead, they've gone a little bit more kind of toward the mid-rangey approach with the songs in there. So we do see 4 Strength of Raging Fire, which is typical in these lists, but we see 4 copies of Along Came Zeus. Usually it's 1 or 2 copies, and also Let the Storm Rage On. So this player kind of going more for that mid-range approach, a little bit more of the control elements before being able to close the game out with your characters. Nice to see some innovation here, and great job to Lucas for taking the top spot. Next up, we have this top 2 list from Vincent Bissonnet, who took 2nd place at the Face-to-Face 1K. Maybe a little bit more like the traditional Amethyst Steel we would see. So we have things in there like Calhoun, which wasn't in that top list that we just looked at. And we do also see the 2 copies of Helga Sinclair. Helga was starting to make her way into these lists as a great counter to Diablo. At a 4 willpower, it's very difficult for Emerald Steel and Amethyst Emerald to be able to remove her before she's able to take down your Diablo, so it makes a lot of sense that we would start seeing her in here. 4 Giant Cobras, of course, is such a great card in this list. And we see 3 copies of Yargo as well. Even though he has that vanish downside, he is still a very, very well-stated character who can cause a lot of problems for a lot of decks. We have this top 4 list. This was from Remy Fried, who was at the face-to-face 1K, and a list that looks quite similar to the list that won last weekend that we were looking at from Nunez. All of the kind of things you would expect to see in here with the 1-drops, the 4 copies of Calhoun, the 4 copies of Giant Cobra, and the 2 libraries in there is a little bit of extra card draw. It just shows you how powerful a package this is for this deck to be doing so well so consistently. And then if you want to see something slightly different in this space, this is a top 8 list from the Bibbidi Bobbidi Brawl from Monkey. It has a lot of the same things in there, but we do see some Pascals, 3 copies of Pascals there, a character that gains evasive when you have other characters on the board, so it really helps you with that early game aggression and can be difficult to remove for a lot of decks. 4 copies of Giant Cobra, of course. 3 copies of Lawrence. I really like Lawrence. He is one of the strongest steel cards. He's a great quester, but he can also help you deal with locations. Nothing to remove damage from him if he does get damaged in this list, though, so that is the one downside compared to something like an Amber Steel, or maybe if you were running the Bell Accomplished Mystic, but nevertheless still a great card to include in this list. We also see 2 copies of the legendary Isma, a 3/3 questing for 2, but you can exert her, and if you have less than 3 cards in your hand, you can draw until you have 3 cards. So she really in this list is replacing the Doc, who we do not see. It's definitely an interesting approach, and of course this player did take top 8, but it does feel like the Doc version is maybe a little bit more consistent. Doc doesn't need to survive in order to trigger his ability, and you can bounce him back with your snakes or your foxes in order to get repeated use out of him as well. The other thing admitted from this list is Pete. Arguably, Pete is one of the strongest cards in the game, being able to stop your opponent's actions, but this deck list is just saying, I don't care about your actions, I'm just going to go fast and close the game before you can stop me. So definitely an interesting approach, and kind of with so many different versions of this list kind of starting to emerge, you can pick which one feels right for your playstyle. And speaking of the Bibbidi Bobbidi Brawl, this is the list that took first place from Absolui, and it is an Amber Steel songs list. What's interesting about Amber Steel songs is really there are 2 ways you can build it, 3 ways technically, I suppose. You can choose to have the Queen shift line, which is what this deck is using, the Robin Hood shift line, which is common and something we're going to see in another deck list, and you can also have the no shift line version as well. So this player closing this event at first place with the Queen shift line. The Queen is particularly powerful if you're expecting a lot of Ruby. Her 3 willpower does mean she is susceptible to Steel's removal, but the 4 strength means it's a lot harder for Ruby decks that are kind of caring about low strength characters to be able to get her off the board. It's also one of the most powerful lines, being able to play the Queen on turn 1, shift her on turn 2, and then sing A Whole New World, especially against Sapphire decks, because it can really, really disrupt them, being able to remove their early ramp and kind of basically just destroy their mulligan. And so yeah, it's a very, very strong line indeed in this list. She can also help you deal with locations, being able to quest and give one of your characters +4 to take out something like a Muktuk Manor. And because of the Queen's ability, we do also see 3 copies of World's Greatest Criminal Mind. Remember, you can give your opponent that strength as well if you need to, and then in that case you'll be able to then target them with the World's Greatest Criminal Mind to give you a little bit of extra removal in this list. After that, we see all of the usual suspects. We see the Cinderellas. Absolutely chose to use 3 copies of Ursula, favoring in that case more the Rapunzel heals rather than something like the Troubadour. And we also see 3 copies of Gaston. Again, very good into Ruby metas because he's a lot harder for Ruby decks to remove than something like Ariel. Great list and great result from Absolui. And then this version of Amber Steel, so this took top 2 at the Shadow Series 1K from Zach Gauser, and it is utilizing the Robin Hood shift line instead. Zach also choosing to use the Troubadour here instead of Ursula, and because of that we see the 2 copies of Miss Bianca there as well. Being able to play her out on turn 4 with an ally means that you have a difficult to remove character who can then sing A Whole New World on the board. After that we see 2 copies of Prince Naveen, a card that I still absolutely love, a great way to break the kind of disadvantage of going second. So he's there to be able to sing those songs if your singer is removed before they're able to. And like the list we just looked at, we also see 2 copies of Aerial Sonic Warrior, who seems to be replacing that kind of slot that Cinderella Stout-Hearted took in these lists. So very nice to see Amber Steel songs still doing well. And if you want a different flavor of Amber Steel songs, then this is the list for you. This list took top 4 at the face-to-face games 1K from Saman Lajoie, and it is looking quite a lot different, and that is because of the inclusion of 4 copies of the Lantern. The Lantern, a great way to help you again kind of deal with that going second disadvantage. And yeah, so because this player is expecting to be getting to those kind of higher inks faster, thanks to the Lantern, we see things like Stitch, Carefree Surfer, a card that really has dropped out of favor in the metagame, but if you're able to get him out sooner, then definitely a very powerful card to play indeed. The 2 copies of Cinderella Stout-Hearted, of course you can shift her in at 5, but if you're able to play Cinderella, play a Lantern, and potentially get her down as soon as turn 4, that can be incredibly powerful to play. 4 copies of Beast, Tragic Hero, the same kind of thing. If you're able to get Beast out sooner, then you're able to start generating lore with him sooner. And Pluto is there as well, 3 copies to protect your characters. For those looking for a little bit more of an aggressive version of Amber Steel, then we have this list. This is a top 4 list from Julio Rodriguez from the Shadow Series 1K, and featuring a lot of what we've come to expect with these more low to the ground versions of Amber Steel. 2 copies of Penny, 2 copies of Lilo there to give you an aggressive turn 2 play. We've got the 4 copies of Happy, a great way to deal with Diablo, but also another character that can be put into the 7 Dwarfs Mind Train to ping 2 damage rather than the regular 1. We also see Helga Sinclair in here, 2 copies. Once more, very, very good way to help you deal with Diablos. And we see 2 copies of Gantu, a 4/3 questing for 4, difficult for Ruby decks to deal with, and can definitely help you close out the game. And another version of this more aggressive version of Amber Steel. A lot of the same things in here. This deck is a little bit lower to the ground than the one we just looked at, so there's a lot more of a concentration around those 2 cost characters. This player looking more just to close the game out as quickly as they possibly can, questing it as fast as they can before their opponent can really deal with what they're putting on the board. The other thing to call out here is 3 copies of Rapunzel's Tower, a great location that can help give your characters even more willpower. Fantastic into Steel metagames in particular, because it does make your character particularly difficult to remove. And of the 4 events we looked at, this is the other deck list that took first place. This was at the Road to Lorcana 6 from ILLUI Magic, and it is Amethyst Emerald. And we'd seen a lot of Amethyst Emerald discard cropping up in the metagame, but this is actually more the mid-range, the more bouncy version of this list. So it is quite a fascinating one to look at. We have a lot of that early aggression, but actually this deck is more slanted toward the mid-game here. One really cool synergy that's been popping up, and not just in this list, in a lot of Amethyst lists, is with Peter Pan Shadowfinder and Iago. Peter Pan Shadowfinder, of course, gives your evasive characters rush, so being able to play Iago on turn 4 as a rush character with 6/4 is very impactful indeed, can help you deal with things like Diablo, but it also means that even if he gets vanished before you can quest with him, you've still been able to make an impact on the board. So you can see why this synergy is starting to show up. But there are also some other very interesting things in this list as well. We have the Shere Khan, 4/4 questing for 4, who makes you discard your hand when you play him. So if you are expecting to empty out your hand, you can play Shere Khan, a great way to close a game. And we also see 1 copy of Kronk. He is Ward, which is very relevant. He dodges all of the Ruby and Steel removal, and any effect that would cause you to discard means that you don't. So he has great synergy there with Shere Khan. You won't have to discard your hand because that's an effect rather than a cost. And it also means that if you are expecting a more discard heavy meta, he is great tech into that. And before we go on to the next deck list, I just want to give a huge shout out to the sponsors of today's video, Heavy Play. Heavy Play have their Equip Mag system, which allows you to connect your deck box to your dice box and your playmat, all with the power of magnets. It makes it super simple to pack up and move between tables when you're playing a tournament. They also have their curved sleeves with curved corners, which make it easy to shuffle, but also mean you'll never have a card upside down in your deck again. If you want to get your hands on any Heavy Play products before your next tournament, you can visit them at heavyplay.com and use the discount code Inkborn10 at checkout to get 10% off your order. All of the details are in the description below. So thanks again to Heavy Play, and now we're going to look at the most represented ink combination this week, which was a Ruby Amethyst. So Ruby Amethyst not putting up maybe the best results, but we do know it is a very consistent deck that is able to pull in top 8s quite frequently. And this list here is looking like a very strong strong core for Ruby Amethyst. A lot of what we'd come to see in previous sets. We've got the Flynn Rider in there, we've got the Sisu in there as well. But the strategy is really going to be about controlling that early game before you're able to get into your mid to late game, where the Ruby removal will really shut down a lot of what your opponent's trying to do. We see 3 copies of Lady Tremaine, 3 copies of Madame Medusa. This was a split we would see back in metagames of Season 4, Season 5, Set 5. And now we're seeing them back here again. We know that these two can be very efficient in terms of removal. The 3-3 split means that you can kind of respond to what your opponent's doing on the side of the board. If you're playing a Sapphire deck who are dropping big characters and maybe just one character at a time, Lady Tremaine is perfect. If you're playing a Steel deck, maybe Steel Song, and your opponent's playing things like Robin Hood, then Madame Medusa is the perfect way to get him off the board. And then in this list, we also see things like Pegasus. There is a good way to deal with Diablo. The 3-1 evasive means you can hopefully at least prevent him from questing if your opponent doesn't have anything to remove your Pegasus. And 2 copies of the library for some additional card draw. Next up, we have this top 8 list from Jeremy Lejoie, looking very similar to a list that we saw at the Oslo event last week. That is because of the inclusion of Lumiere. Lumiere is very good into opposing Ruby matchups, being able to give all of your characters +1, makes them just a little bit harder to remove with your opponent's Ruby removal, which is very concerned with strength, but it also means that you can make better trades and help you deal with location. So Lumiere, a very cool card to see in this list. We see the 3 copies of Peter Pan, a card we've talked about already, and because this list is running the 4 copies of Maui Half Shark, Peter Pan is there, able to give him rush, which can be super impactful. You've also got Moana, an evasive, so great to give her rush as well. All there really to help you deal with your opponent's Diablos if you're facing those, but can be so useful into so many different matchups as well. And the other Ruby Amethyst list we're going to look at took top 8 at the Road to Lorcana event from Kin Uki, and this list has some fun things mixed into it. So we see the Queen of Hearts, the 1/4 questing for 1, but gets +3 when she has some damage on her, which is quite easy to do. It means she's difficult to remove, but it means you can also do things like using Teeth and Ambition on her, giving her that damage, allowing her to immediately get that extra strength. After that, this player is opting for a split of 4 Lady Tremaines and 3 Sisus. We don't see any copies of Madame Medusa in this list, so Sisu there to help you deal with the aggressive list, and Lady Tremaine there to help you deal with the slower lists. So fascinating list there, and again, great job making a top 8. Next up, we have the second most represented ink pairing this week. Maybe not doing as well in terms of top 8 performances, but still a powerful deck in its own right. This is Daniel Taranashi's deck. He took top 4 at the Bibbidi Bobbidi Brawl, and of course we've seen this kind of evolution of Ruby Sapphire more toward that DKP variety, using the McDuck Manners, the Maui Half Sharks, and the Pirate's Life to really powerful effect. But what is quite fascinating about this list is actually the item package. So we see 1 Vitalosphere, 1 Ice Block, 1 Sapphire Coil, 4 Popsicles, and 1 Merlin's Carpet Bag. A bit of a departure from that traditional core of this deck list, but some really good inclusions. We know the power of the Vitalosphere paired with Maui Half Shark, and being able to then recur that with Merlin's Carpet Bag, if you're not able to find your Tamator happy as a clan, means you can get repeated uses out of that. Ice Block and Sapphire Coil are there. We do see 3 copies of Sisu in this list. Of course, we've seen this list running no strength reduction abilities, but being able to have those just means Sisu can hit maybe a few more things than she would otherwise. And of course, especially with the Sapphire Coil, you're rinking quite a lot with this deck with the different actions you have, so you are going to be able to trigger it. And then another Ruby Sapphire list doing well this weekend. This is a top 8 deck list from the face-to-face event from Orlando Perez, and this is looking very similar to the DKP list. And actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there are only 2 cards different. So DKP was running 1 Goofy and 3 All Is Found, and Orlando is choosing here to run a 2-2 split of those. I think that is quite a good decision. All Is Found good if you're playing into discard decks, because it means you're not sacrificing cards from your hand, but we did see DKP, it was inking it pretty much every game. So Goofy there helps you deal with a lot more of those aggressive decks, and also helps you generate some lore that your opponent can't prevent unless they're not exerting their characters, which also prevents them from gaining lore. So it does have a nice bit of utility there, but great job to Orlando with this performance. Next up, we're looking at Emerald Steel. This is a top 8 deck list from the Shadow series from Tyler Miller, and it is utilizing the main core that we've come to expect with this deck. We do see the Floodborn Pete in this list. It can be a card that's very difficult to remove, and preventing your opponents being able to exert characters to sing songs can shut down a lot of strategies, especially against things like Steel Song. And as we've seen, even in Amethyst Steel, we've got a lot more songs in those decks. It's also great in the mirror match too. Other things to call out in this list, we see 3 copies of I'm Still Here. That's a song that lets you draw a card, but also gives chosen character resist +2, paired with Ursula Deceiver of All being able to sing this twice, gain 2 cards, and then give your Diablo resist +4. Very strong indeed. Helps make sure that he sticks to the board. And of course, we've got 3 copies of the Hidden Cove as well, making your Diablo even more durable. So great looking list there. And I actually wanted to highlight this list. So this was a top 16 list, but it is a very interesting one that I thought would be good to look at. So this is from Richard Sandoval, also at the Bibbidi Bobbidi Brawl. And it looks quite different to what we've seen in this other list. So the main things to note is that we do not see the discard package necessarily in this list. Instead, this player is looking for control more through the board. But it's these 4 copies of the Return of Hercules that are really what sets this deck apart. And because actually a lot of decks are running more to the mid-range strategy at the moment, it does mean that perhaps you could play this and your opponent may not have a big character in their hands to respond with. And because we're running that action, we see big boys in this list. We see the Prince Philip Floodborn, a 9-cost 6/6 that is going to banish all damage characters when he's played. We see the 4 copies of the small Prince Philip in this list because of that. He is a great aggressive quester, but being able to shift onto him is very good. And 4 copies of Chief Bogo, because you're going to be playing those Floodborns, especially if you're able to get the combo of Philip and Bogo out together, then you can essentially wipe your opponent's side of the board, because of course when it comes to the bag you do get to choose the order that these effects are resolved. So you would resolve Bogo first and then Prince Philip and banish them all. We also see 2 copies of John Silver in this list. You can of course shift him on to off, but ideally I think you're going to be looking to get him out with the Return of Hercules as well. And then 1 copy of Prince John's Mirror. We've seen fewer item decks at the moment, which means there's fewer item hate in the metagame. So potentially your Prince John's Mirror could stick on the board and really whittle down your opponent's resources that way. Absolutely fascinating list. It's great to see something maybe a little bit more off meta still able to pull up a good result, and that was top 16 at this event. Next up, another deck list a little bit off meta. This is a top 8 deck list from the same event, Bibbidi Bobbidi Brawl, from Sage Mode, and this is an Emerald Sapphire list utilizing cards like the Ink Geyser. So we did see a couple of weeks ago a similar list doing quite well, and it's great to see it pulling up another good performance here. The core of this list really is going to be getting ink as fast as you can, put some characters on the board, and then play the Ink Geyser to prevent your opponent from being able to then respond to them. We see 3 copies of the Fishbone Quill, which means that if you're able to establish a few of those on the board, you can then recover your ink quite quickly. We also see 2 copies of Bend to My Will, so it's kind of like an alternate strategy. If you're not able to set up the Ink Geyser, then potentially you can set up the Bend to My Will instead, and then lock down your opponent's resources that way. Next up, we have this top 8 deck list. It is Amber Amethyst from Faren, who was at the Road to Lorcana 6 event. This is the more mid-range version of this in combination. We've seen the more hyper aggro deck list. That is not what we're looking at now. This still has a lot of aggressive questers, but is looking more toward closing the game out in the mid game. I did mention that we were seeing a lot more of this pairing of the Peter Pan and the Iago. Very powerful combination if you're able to pull it off. And then after that, we see all of those strong mid game staples, things like Merlin Goat, Merlin Rabbit helping you to refill your hand, and then Belle and Elsa there to help you control your opponent's side of the board. So very interesting looking list, and great to see it doing well. If you're looking for something a little bit more aggressive, we have this top 8 list at the face-to-face event from Clara Sear. That might be a name you're familiar with. Clara has done particularly well at a few DLCs and is a local Montreal player, which is always nice to see. And this is the Chernadog Amber Emerald list here. And actually this deck has evolved slightly from what we've seen in the past. So we do still see the early aggressive start, but we see the introduction of things like Pluto, a 0/2 questing for 1, but can be exerted to reduce the cost of the next character you play, allowing you to play out some of your higher cost characters sooner. But what is fascinating about this list is the 4 copies of Zero to Hero. This is a song that reduces the cost of the next character you play by the number of characters you have on the board, and with so many 1-cost characters, you're able to flood the board in your first 2 to 3 turns and then start singing this to be able to play some of your bigger characters down. And considering that's the strategy, it does make sense that we do see some higher cost characters. We see 4 copies of Surfer Stitch, yet again great to see him making another appearance in the metagame. We see 4 copies of Clarabelle, so we do have the small Clarabelle who you can shift onto, but you may also be able to get her out with Zero to Hero. Because you're basically flooding the board and emptying your hand, then Clarabelle will help you recover some of your card advantage. And we also see 2 copies of Chernobog. Because you've got the synergy already with Tramp, then it does make sense that Chernobog is in this list. This one probably looks like the most fun deck list I've seen from this week, and it's great to see, you know, a deck like this can still do really well at an event, so great job to Clara. And then the last deck we're looking at today, I know some people are going to be happy because it is a Sapphire Steel list. Sapphire Steel is not dead, it is still showing up and making good results. So this took top 4 at the Shadow Series 1K from Daryl Robertson, and it is the more aggressive Sapphire Steel deck list. And something we're seeing with this deck list, and we're actually seeing this before even the Hiram ban, but because people were running things like Doc already in this list, the inclusion of the 7 Dwarfs Mind Tray makes a lot of sense as a way to help remove what your opponent's putting on the board. We have also 4 copies of Happy in this list. Again, great way to deal with Diablo, but also is another way to trigger damage from the 7 Dwarfs Mind Train. But the strategy largely remains the same with this deck list. It's using Alice to give your characters ward and some extra lore to really aggressively close out the game. We see 4 copies of Cogsworth. If you're expecting a lot of steel, then Cogsworth is a great card into those metas. His Unwind ability can really shut down a lot of steel removal, and because he's ward, he is particularly sticky to the board. And then one fun card that's included in this deck list is LeFou. He's a 2/3 questing for 1, and during your turn, if you banish a character, you can play him for free. So with something like Calhoun, who wants to be challenging and banishing characters, then being able to play LeFou for free just really helps you toward that strategy of really flooding the board, giving your opponent far too many problems to solve than they can with the ink they have. So it is true that Sapphire Steel, we're seeing a lot less of it, but it is still pulling up good results, and I'm sure as people get over the initial shock, we're going to see a lot more Sapphire Steel creep back into the metagame. So that's it for this week, and it's great to see that the metagame continues to be healthy with a lot of viable decks available to play. But let me know down in the comments, have you picked which deck you're taking to your set championships yet? Me and Matheus are both still trying to decide, so give us some tips. What do you think we should take? And if you enjoyed this video, please do be sure to give us a like, as it does help us out, and subscribe because we'll be having more meta reports in future. I just want to give another quick shout out to the sponsor of today's video, HeavyPlay. If you want to get your hands on any HeavyPlay products, you can visit them at heavyplay.com and use the discount code Inkborn10 at checkout. And also another shout out to our YouTube members. We appreciate you so much. So thank you for all of the support. If you would like to become a YouTube member or just find out more details, you can hit the join button down below and see all of the things available, including early access to our videos. And with that said, until the next meta report, happy questing.